So we're at Emmanuel Church on Newberry Street, 15 Newberry Street. And we had some breakfast here, my camera guy and myself. And my camera guy has been wanting to hear my story of why I would take up such a arduous project of living homeless for 366 days. So he's going to ask me questions, and I'm going to answer those questions and delve in a little bit into my story.
All right, Marshall. Want to start with telling us where you're from?
Originally, I'm from, I grew up in Hamilton, Mass. When I was young. I was first born in a two-child family. Mother and father bought a house out there. It's a rich town, but we live in a poor little area called Asbury Grove. And my mother and father had my sister like 2 years after I was born. And from there, as I grew older, I moved all over the North Shore, and I had a bit of a tumultuous childhood. LA, would you like to hear a little bit more about that?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So when I was about 7 years old, like things were good up until that point, 6 or 7, and like my mother and father just began fighting like cats and dogs, and my sister and I witnessed this. It was difficult for us to discuss a little bit of their issues. My mother would drink, and my father had bipolar, and things weren't going well. They both have their sides of the story, but they decided to get divorced. When my mother and father got divorced, it was just heartbreaking for my sister and I. We were young. When my father was out of the house, we'd see him every other weekend, and on Wednesdays, my mom began dating other men, which was uncomfortable for us, drinking more. She struggled with depression. I was unhappy at that point. I acted out in school. They tried to figure out what was wrong with me, diagnosed me with ADHD at a young age. And then that was difficult, being labeled as a deficient and having to struggle in school, put in special classes. And I felt like I'd kind of been put in my place in the world, like I wasn't good enough. And I got into other bad activities, stealing when I was young, hanging out with other disadvantaged youths in school, acting out, looking for attention. I developed relationships with, the other kids, which I found were stronger relationships than I had at home, with my family, besides my sister, who I love to death. And I just lost my faith and trust in adults. I didn't like authority. And it was just an unhappy childhood. I began abusing my Adderall when I was about 11, 12 years old, smoking cigarettes, drinking. I got introduced to marijuana. Now, I fell in love with the drug of marijuana, which was illegal at the time. And what I realized from that drug is it made me feel good. And I just really didn't feel good about myself, naturally. So I began selling marijuana so I could have, marijuana for free. That brought friends, and, I was always looking to connect with kids and stuff, and, be popular, because I had wicked low self-esteem. And as I got older, my behavior just got worse. I struggled in school. I just would be in and out of different bad situations. My mother would kick me out of the house. I'd be living with my father and stepmother. I had issues with my stepmother. I was out of that house. I lived with my friend and his mother for a year when I was 14 to 15. My father ended up getting divorced, and he got his own place and invited me to live with him. And by that time, I had been in trouble with the law. I was selling marijuana to get by. I was going to a technical high school. My buddy that I had been living with at the time went there as well. That's how we went to school together. I lived with him, and I ended up going back to live with my father. And when I moved with my father, it wasn't the best thing for me, because my father was not a disciplinarian. He pretty much told me, he's like, son, this is our bachelor pad and we'll let you learn your life lessons. And we moved to the town of Danvers. It had a big high school. And when I went there, I saw opportunity in that, you know, my illegal activities could flourish. I began selling weed in the school. I used school as a social event. And, you know, my behavior just accelerated in a bad direction. Getting in trouble, drinking and smoking weed, getting in trouble caught selling marijuana and mushrooms. I had a few bad acid trips. I was institutionalized for a couple of those. And I didn't care. I just kept going. Like, I was young, free. I felt like I could do whatever I wanted. I ended up dropping out of high school. And, you know, I got my GED, luckily. And then when I was like 18 years old, 17, 18, I'd gotten in trouble for, you know, breaking into houses and tripping on acid. And then they let me out. I was depressed. I wanted to do something with my life more than sitting around selling weed on the couch. So I ended up working on some fishing boats. And I had a job, and like that built some self-esteem for me. It was hard work. You know, it was cool. I liked being away out in the water. And I did that for a few years. And, you know, I ended up meeting a girl. Like, I had a real kind of, you know, relationship, kind of romantic relationship. And my life was looking good, like as if I might get married and settle down and just live a regular life. But, you know, as fate would have it, I got a call on the fishing boat one day, and they said that someone in my family had passed away. So I asked the Coast Guard. They wouldn't tell me. We'd get back to harbor, and when my girlfriend came to pick me up on the boat, I asked her, I said, who in my family died? And she said, well, I can't tell you. I said, well, you're gonna have to tell me. And she said, your sister's dead. Like, this was crushing for me, and I did not expect something like this to happen. And it really broke me and my mother and my father. It broke us all down. It caused a lot of pain. And then from there, I just started to cope with that by drinking and getting back into drugging activities. I got introduced to cocaine, the bar scene. I was just about 21. And I got introduced to another drug that would change my life drastically. I got introduced to pharmaceutical opiates. They were big at the time. It was during the push, like the early 2000s.
So you were another victim of the opioid crisis.
I was a victim, you know, like we didn't know at the time, like it was fun, it was partying, and then that's what killed my sister. Her boyfriend had been, you know, selling opiates down in Florida. She went to visit him, he gave her a handful of pills and she overdosed and died. And, you know, I didn't really understand how addictive these drugs were, but I liked the drug. Like, I started with Vicodins. I used to trade coke with my buddy. I started selling cocaine because everyone in the bars was doing it. I figured I could make a buck. And I was doing Vicodins like 3 or 4 times a week, but then that turned into every day. Then I was doing OCs. My drug habit was expensive, so I had to hustle to provide my lifestyle, my drug habit. And then that just accelerated over the years, you know, from like 20 to 26. You know, my life was pretty crazy, and I made promises to myself in the beginning. I was like, oh, I'll never use heroin, I'll never mess with hard drugs like crack or crystal meth. So, you know, that's how it was. We didn't really see what was happening. So just to fast forward, when I was 26 years old, I was a full-blown heroin addict. And I'd been selling a lot of drugs, a lot of cocaine. I was selling a lot of crack cocaine. And I ended up getting involved in a big methamphetamine and heroin deal with a friend of mine that, you know, it just went wrong. The feds got involved and we got busted. And, you know, I'd done 20 days county prior to that. And when I got busted by the feds, the indictment was severe. I had minimum mandatory of 10 years. My co-defendant got 3.5 years, and I was sentenced to 12.5 years in federal prison. And that was a a crushing point in my life, and there was nothing I could do about it. I always thought like I'd always kind of weasel my way out of every little bit of trouble I got myself in, and this was a real thing. I thought fate had my back, and I guess, you know, my karma just finally.
Your luck ran out.
My luck ran out, my good karma. So going into federal prison for me was, I looked at it as an opportunity to improve myself. I knew that something was wrong, and I had the idea that I could fix myself. I didn't expect anyone else to fix me, and it was a long process. There was a lot of resentment and hate and hurt, and the way that I dealt with a lot of stuff, and the way my mind is I need stimulation, constant stimulation. Is I would read. I read fiction books and series and things, and then I got into like nonfiction. I wanted to learn things. I wanted to learn about the world. I wanted to learn about other people, myself. I would read like things about science, philosophy, religion would fascinated me. I was fascinated by biography, like people's lives. I like to learn about people in history, and you know, stuff like that was really interesting. Science, and I just kept reading and reading and learning. Eventually, through the prison, they had a volunteer that would come in and visit, and I was trying to get an education. My family had been helping me with some college courses, and a professor that was visiting us named Professor Ferrari, we took a college course through her, and she ended up sponsoring me to get an associate's degree in psychology. So I was able to get a college education, which I put my whole heart and soul into. I get books off of the Interlochen Library. I read everything psychology. I did all my coursework, and I passed with a 3.8 GPA. And you know, for me, I actually felt like I had a direction, somewhere I could go, you know, in my life, is like with an actual career instead of just working with my hands and work with my mind. And I continued reading over the years, and about a little over 4 years ago, I was released from prison. I had to struggle and fight to get working in the addiction field. I was very motivated. I tried to connect with the recovery communities. I wanted to be a part of that. I'm on a 12-stepper. I ran into a lot of resistance in some places, and it wasn't engaging enough for me. I didn't really enjoy myself, so I started a smaller nonprofit with some friends that the purpose was to give people more resources, to help connect with other, you know, nonprofits, network out, and give people things that are in recovery or struggling with addiction, and I guess some of the underlying causes, ways to enhance their lives, ways to bring more value in their lives, events, activities, different resources to help. I ended up working at a detox as well, and then from there I started working for a company called Aware Recovery Care that did in-home addiction treatment. Oh, and just to backtrack a little, I didn't mention, I couldn't get a job in treatment, so I had to go back to school. I took a recovery coaching course and community health workers course. So I got training around that, and I was grateful for that training because it taught me how different techniques to help work with people that have behavioral issues, especially substance use disorder, addiction issues. And when I went to work with Aware Recovery Care, it was a new organization in Massachusetts, and we were all very passionate about building this new Aware Recovery Care agency in Massachusetts and bringing these services and helping people heal from addiction. The program was 1 year. I love the company. I like the in-home model. The environmental piece was huge because if you take someone out of a triggered environment, you know, and you treat them for a behavioral issue, and then you bring them back to a triggered environment, you know, that environment's just it's gonna encourage them. It's gonna cause them to relapse, to go back, and they're going to be saturated with those triggers to re-engage in that problematic behavior. If a person heals from a behavioral issue within that environment that they live in, the chances of success increase exponentially. I loved Aware for this. You know, it was very smart, it was new, and I did that for like 3 years. And recently I watched a new CEO come in, and some real things that I didn't. Let's just put it this way: things I didn't agree with. He's a kind of a corporate, money-hungry Napoleon type syndrome dude, and the company just began to take a nosedive. I picked up another job, housing homeless people, because these jobs don't pay a lot of money. We weren't really rewarded for the work we did at Aware and developing the Mass Agency, which I'll say was the biggest agency. My job is I was a lead recovery coach. I managed Middlesex County. Sorry, there's people yelling up there. Middlesex County recovery coaches. I was a lead recovery coach. And I was helping house homeless people for Elliot. And in the development of my nonprofit, which was another thing I was doing during this period about a year ago, I began to learn that, although there's a lot of charities out there and there's a lot of people that do charitable work, I realized that there's a lot of nefarious in that as well. I worked really hard to connect with a lot of other charitable organizations. I met really great people that I loved working with, and we did some great work. And then I just got stonewalled, ghosted, or people just straight up wasted my time. People would not show up for meetings, for example, like in-person meetings and things, and not get back to me. I got frustrated, and that's where I came up with the idea for this project. Is I was burning the candle at both ends. I was just discouraged, and I was a little bit disappointed in some of the unsavoriness within the social service industry that I'd seen and within the addiction treatment industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, why don't I go independent? I put a motion into the feds to get my probation terminated. It was 8-year probation. I ended up winning that motion, got my probation terminated, so I no longer had a chain from them. And I said, you know what, I've hustled my whole life. Why do I have to be bound to other agencies? What if I did a project, I was homeless for a full year, and I just documented it, and I learned about it, and I shed light on some of the issues so, people could see. It's something that could exist out in, the, online stratosphere for anybody to use, whether it be academic people or just regular people or people that are out there in it, build it out and show what the resources is, do it in Massachusetts. I built a business around it, an LLC, and decided I was going to make this my thing to do. And, that's what I'm doing. I decided to do it. It really, I have passion for it. So, here I am. I'm out here doing it.
Marshall's out here?
So in the time that you've been doing this,
Sorry, I'm always around. My camera guy and I are always around people, so sometimes we get interruptions. So where are we at? LA.
you tell me.
So yeah, that's the project. I built it out, I put it together, and this is what it is. 366 days.
Do you still use?
So it's a good question. That's a good question, LA. I haven't used an opiate in over 15 years. I don't use any hard drugs. I take caffeine pills for my ADHD. I'm on no medication besides that.
What kind of caffeine pills?
They're like 200 milligram caffeine pills. I get them at Walmart. They're like $3, and I take one in the morning. Occasionally, I take one in the afternoon, and it helps focus my mind. I don't know if other people with ADHD might understand, but I wake up and sometimes it's hard to get going, and my mind races constantly. It's what I call an ADHD paralysis, and I can't. And so many thoughts coming in, and it's hard for me to focus. So stimulant helps me.
Do you ever feel like in using these, you're possibly opening the door to going back into using?
No. I don't. I would never use a hard amphetamine. I'm never going to use an opiate. But I will say that I occasionally, and not during this project, but I have smoked marijuana, and I will use psychedelics occasionally, maybe upwards of 4 times a year, which hasn't been an issue for me. So I haven't had an issue with addiction besides nicotine in, I would say, 14 years. And that was a decision for me. And I decided that I wasn't gonna continue using. A lot of people in like different recovery circles like to hate, and I've had people talk shit to me and say awful shit, and some people just frowned upon some of my decisions in the past. But at this point, I don't care. I don't work in treatment. I don't have to follow a 12-step modality, and I worked hard to educate myself. And I'm just here to say that I don't waste my time on small-minded people. My health is good, and my resolve is strong not to fall back into addiction.
Because there are those who would say that you're still using, even though it's something as simple as a caffeine pill, it's kind of hypocritical because you say you've come from this history of drug use, so you don't feel that you're opening the door to go back into that?
Absolutely not.
So you don't think it's possible?
Anything's possible.
So what's your plan from here?
Plan for here is 366 days homeless.
And what do you hope to accomplish?
I hope to get through 366 days homeless alive.
Good answer. And what do you hope to accomplish with this project?
I hope the project brings something of worth and value to society. And I hope it helps the people that we're going to be documenting.
Anything else you want to say?
No, that's it, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for sitting with me.
Thank you. I'm sure the viewers will appreciate it as well. We're out.